Last year, we took a look at some N64 platformers that I would consider to be more on the forgotten side of things. Tonic Trouble, Mischief Makers, and Chameleon Twist. And while I wasn't the biggest fan of everything that those games had to offer, I thought they were still worth playing. Hey, if the entire console generation is going to be considered the golden age of 3D platformers, you may as well play everything there is to play, and then some. I have since gone ahead and played the Chameleon Twist sequel, and boy, what happened here? I'm sorry, was the original Chameleon just too cute for the hardcore gamers? At least everywhere except Japan, they kept it adorable. That's appreciated. High voltage screaming action. Certainly that's subjective. I was thinking that I would have a lot more to say about this game going into this episode, but honestly, I don't. It's kinda just a not as good Chameleon Twist, with a whole lot more waiting. Like, holy cow, the game asks you to wait so many times! And then like, there's this weird roulette power-up that sometimes just turns your run into a crawl, just like that, and you're forced to deal with it for a little bit. I mean, sometimes the power-up does nothing at all, which is weird, but I would much rather that than being forced to go slow in a platformer. That sucks. Overall though, Chameleon Twist 2, not terrible, but you're better off playing the first one. Even if the new Chameleons just look like an ugly Yuka. Nah, I take it back, the sequel's better. But I made sure to listen after that last episode. You see, I thought I knew the entire N64 library, but I really wanted to see what you guys were going to be suggesting in the comments of said episode. I know, it's a novel concept. So, if you're in the market for some more N64 platformers out there that are a bit under the radar, this is the place to be. Listen, alright, Nitro Red can't get to all of them before I can. Let me talk about some of these games too, alright? Oh man, if any game oozes that good old 90s cheese, it's Spacestation Silicon Valley. A slideshow of images of janky 3D models, acting like an old CRT TV with the interface, using Comic Sans for the font, the absolute madmen. And the story here is so ridiculous it's on a level that I really couldn't anticipate. So, the space station, Silicon Valley, filled with robotic animals and a few scientists, disappeared after it launched in the year 2001. 1,000 years later, in the year 3000, it reappears, and it's on a collision course towards Earth. Well, I guess we know now where Sonic Adventure 2 got its inspiration. So Dan Danger and his robot companion Evo set off to investigate. Dan Danger, that's a pretty sweet name. Well, as expected, their ship crashes, causing Evo to eject out of his seat and break into a bunch of pieces. And, well, this is where the core concept of the game comes from. You take control of Evo's microchip, which allows you to take over the wide variety of animals that are spread throughout the entire space station. And whenever you enter one for the first time, there's this sick Matrix-esque reveal of what the animal is and what it can do. That's pretty sweet. And the amount of animals that you can take control of is wild. There's rocket-shooting dogs, elephants, hyena bikers, camels that spit, a king rat that farts. Beautiful. Oh, and the normal mice just poop. Nice, dude. And each of these creatures are introduced at a great pace. You see, the game is structured with a basic level setup, with each one dropping you off into a small sandbox, and you have a few objectives to go through. And once you set off, well, it's up to you to explore and experiment with what works and what doesn't, and, well, it's not always pleasant. But the creativity of what these animals can do shines through so often, and when it finally clicks on which one you need to take control of to do the thing that's asked of you, oh, it's very satisfying. But then the game has you do combat every now and then, and it blows. Mainly because it takes no time for you to die. No lie, if the game had like an infinite health code or something, it would be way more enjoyable. I know I'm complaining, oh man, games are just too hard for stupid old me. Nah, this is pretty cheap. There are some minor control issues, like some animals move too slow, some animals platform in pretty cumbersome ways, but come on now, it's an N64 quotes platformer. Some of these things just come with the platform. Like, listen to this, sometimes the camera isn't great. I know, truly shocking to hear. But the health issue is really the only part of the game that's actively preventing you from enjoying it a lot more, with no better way to progress than kinda just hope that this time you get lucky. Even when I go in knowing exactly what I have to do, sometimes the character will just be like 1 inch to the left or something like that, and I'll get hit by some other missile that I didn't get hit from last time, and there you go, gotta start again. It can kinda suck. That being said though, based purely on the originality and the sense of style that is overwhelming in this game, I still had a good time. It is definitely more annoying than it should be at times, but I can't say I've really played anything like it. I guess Super Mario Odyssey letting you take control of a ton of different things with Cappy sorta comes close, but that's about it. The soundtrack is pretty poppin' too, and it actually plays in the game world. If you find one of these stereos and destroy it, that's pretty cool. So yeah, not perfect, but a damn interesting game to say the least. During an era where a lot of these games were considered Super Mario 64 clones, it's nice to see one do something absolutely original. You know, these developers would make another game on the 64 called Body Harvest, a sort of open world third-person shooter where you like shoot the crap out of insects. It looks pretty cool. Come to find out that actually that team, DMA Design, would become Rockstar North, the people behind Grand Theft Auto. So yeah, pretty cool history all around. You know, put a microchip and some robotic animals into Grand Theft Auto 6, and we may have something there. And speaking of Super Mario 64 clones and companies with interesting history, Rocket Robot on Wheels. It kinda sucks that this game is considered forgotten because, oh man, do I ever adore it. Sucker Punch, the company known for the Sly Cooper and Infamous franchises, got their start with this adorable little robot dude. Although Rocket only has one wheel and the title implies that he has multiple, now we know why the game didn't sell well. The theme park, Whoopi World, is in crisis. While the owner is out at a party, the mascot's sidekick, Jojo, is tired of the walrus Whoopi being the star of the show, and he finally takes his chance to do something about it. And Rocket, the obedient little robot that he is, goes off to explore the park, retrieve all of the tickets and tokens that Jojo stole, as well as Whoopi, and make sure that everything is good for the park's opening day. It's a pretty interesting premise that gives you just enough reason to go on an adventure. And once you start exploring, it's obvious that this game nails that amusement park aesthetic perfectly. Just in the first level alone, we're dropped off onto a beachside boardwalk with a rideable hot dog car, there's multiple attractions to take part in, and there's even a roller coaster creator that you're then able to go and ride yourself. That's really cool. Not every stage necessarily goes for that theme park aesthetic, but the things that you're able to do within each of them are just so out there and varied, it ends up being a super compelling adventure from start to finish. And this is also thanks to how Rocket controls. If you played Sucker Punch's other games, then you would know that they have a certain sense of flow and momentum to them when it comes to the platforming, while still being able to nail where you want to go at almost all times. Rocket has that same exact feel from his bouncy jumps, swinging, grabbing hold of items and throwing them. It just feels really good. Have you ever played a game that grabbed you in such a way that you just get mad at yourself for not experiencing it when you were a kid? This game right here. It's pretty damn good. We have an original idea with an adorable mascot character that fits in right with the rest of them. Need I remind you, one of them was a glove, and it's all presented to us in a gameplay style that we're definitely familiar with. But outright labeling any 3D platformer as a Super Mario 64 clone isn't really fair to what the game does on its own. That being said, it is structured in a similar way, more so like Banjo-Kazooie than anything else. Each level is a sandbox with a dozen tickets to get for completing objectives, there's a couple health upgrades to find, and 200 tokens to collect that can be brought over to Tinker in the home world to unlock some more abilities like a grappling hook or ice breath. And every single tool in your arsenal is put to the test, so when the time comes for the final level, this massive obstacle course, you feel ready for it because you already messed with everything you have available to you. And no worries if you think you'll get lost, each collectible ticket has a little hint attached to them, and your quest to find everything is nothing a little bit of exploration and experimentation can't solve. And while we can argue whether or not a lava pit here is something that constitutes a theme park setting, it's awesome that each level has a strong identity, from one having a big painting mechanic to one being entirely based on riding a flying carpet. Again, frustrations do show up from time to time, but on the whole, it is a damn magical 3D platformer, and considering how good Sucker Punch's later games were, I would say that this makes them one of the most consistent third-party developers out there. Funnily enough, I've also always considered this part of an unofficial platformer trilogy with Rayman 2 and Tonic Trouble. Not just because Ubisoft published all three, but because back in 1998 there was this promo tape that advertised all three games. And for me, it was at the start of this Rayman cartoon VHS tape that I had, because that was totally a thing. And since I didn't own this game until I got older, as well as Tonic Trouble, I watched this advertisement over and over again. It is ingrained into my psyche. The Tonic Trouble commercial was just a bunch of people beating up tomatoes.
That's right, a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, sure, I'll buy that game. All these years later, being able to finally play these games to completion and talk about it with you guys is personally really satisfying. Also, it's the best game on the 64 to come in a red cartridge. Take that, Jeremy McGrath. And finally, we're ending off with Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. You know, I did want to go into this talking about just how forgotten this little guy is, but he recently just got a costume in Smash Bros. Ultimate. How awesome is that? It was revealed like 20 seconds before Sans, so he immediately went back to being forgotten, but hey, for those 20 seconds, ooh, what a time to be alive. Overall though, Mystical Ninja is indeed a forgotten series, which is crazy because it's absolutely massive. Just gotta do one little internet search here. Bam! A couple of the localized games did make their way to the Virtual Console services, but for the most part, this is a large franchise in Japan, and that's about it. They gave one game a shot on the Super Nintendo, and of course here we are talking about one of their attempts on the N64. And yeah, it takes no time to see just how Japanese we're dealing with here. Right as you boot the game up, we got a full-on anime-esque opening, all done with the in-game models, which is pretty wild for the 64, and actual Japanese vocals being sung. Well, if they want me to really feel like I'm in a Japanese setting, they nailed it. While our heroes Goemon and Ebisumaru were out shopping, a giant flying object appears and fires a laser at Oedo Castle, fully transforming it. So after we have Ebisumaru do this for a little bit, we go off to investigate. From there, honestly, the story ends up going a bunch of different ways. This really does have that sort of long-running anime feel to it. The second one story arc ends, we start off on another one, but all with the goal of stopping this evil idol, Spring Breeze Dancin'. That's a pretty fantastic name, all things considered. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about this series going into this game, but if you had told me earlier that this is essentially a Zelda-styled adventure where you explore different lands and towns with the main goal of getting through different dungeons, except you do a lot more platforming than puzzle solving, yeah, I would have signed up for this years ago. Navigation can be a bit confusing at times. In my experience, it's best to have a guide on you, since the game doesn't really do an awesome job reminding you of where you need to go next. But once you have that sense of direction, it is surprisingly super fun. You explore massive castles, deal with ghosts with the power of a special camera, turn yourself into a mermaid to deal with underwater sections. Fast travel is courtesy of a giant flying dragon, and hey, if you do want to be traditional and stick to the in-game method of trying to figure out what to do next, you can always ask for assistance from Plasma Man. Plasma! I haven't been able to get that stupid voice out of my head. It's been weeks. Well, now that's absolutely terrifying. And like, whenever something kind of humorous happens in the story, a laugh track plays? Man, this game is weird. Oh, and just in case you were wondering, because I know you were, of course Goemon can go Super Saiyan, why would you think otherwise? For the most part, this is what the entire game is all about. Talking to civilians in different towns, mowing down a bunch of enemies across the lands, and getting through the obstacles that stand in your way in the dungeons leading up to boss fights. And the whole time, the soundtrack is fantastic. Constant jams from start to finish. But when the game does want to change things up, well, that's when you call upon this giant mech, Impact, accompanied with its own theme song. Because of course it does. And after running towards the villain in question, destroying anything that you come in contact with, you then take part in a first-person Punch-Out style fight with laser beams, throwing fists all over the place. This is ridiculous. They were pretty difficult to get through at first as well, but once I learned about some of these special moves that you can pull off, oh boy, did I ever just dominate from then on. This This game is fantastic. Dare I say, when it comes to third-party games on the Nintendo 64, something that the console didn't really excel at, this is easily one of the best that you can play. They did make another game on the N64 with Goemon's Great Adventure, which does have similar elements, but this is a 2D platformer instead, something more in line with the other Goemon game that released outside of Japan. The plot is ridiculous, has to be expected at this point, but like, Ebisamaro constantly talks about wanting to summon the actual early 90s actor James Dean. What? The game overall is a bit tough actually, especially in co-op, but once again, super fun. It's also one of the few mythical games out there on the N64 that actually uses the D-pad. Pretty interesting. I would say we definitely had a better lineup of games this time around. Titles that do a much better job representing the N64 generation as the quote-unquote golden age of 3D platformers. I may not be over the moon about Spacestation Silicon Valley, but I can always appreciate when a game strives to do something original. And hell, I finally saw the opportunity to talk about Rocket Robot on Wheels. That's good enough for me. Like I said last time, the quality of these games doesn't really matter in this case. I just enjoy finally getting to explore everything that this console has to offer. If you have any more suggestions about some forgotten platformers that can be found on the Nintendo 64 that you want me to check out, and let's expand on the idea, PlayStation, maybe Sega Saturn, that console probably has a ton of those, then go ahead and leave them below. I am very interested to see what you guys have to say, and maybe we can return to this idea next year. We can make this another sort of annual thing that I do. I feel like I need to continue this topic because otherwise those dancing buff men are going to be haunting my nightmares for years. And ooh boy, I don't know if I want that.